Let's look at the first three lines of Beowulf. What we gardena in jardahum, theid kunninga thrimje frunon, hu tha edelingas ellen frimedon. These lines are a little more complicated than the average. The poem opens with a rhetorical flourish which involves some syntactical complexity, but you can learn a good bit about reading Old English poetry by studying them carefully. When you start to analyze a complicated sentence, first try to get a sense of the sentence's structure. A good first step is to find and mark the subordinate clauses. To do this, look for words that typically begin subordinate clauses. Here, who, how, which begins a noun clause. Since subordinate clauses often, though not always, have their verbs at the end, you can often find the end of the clause by finding the verb. That works in this case. We've just one subordinate clause, which we can bracket for later consideration, and whatever's left over is the main clause. Next, note that line 1 starts with the famous interjection what. Interjections don't participate in the syntax of a sentence, at least not in ways that we need to worry about, so let's set this one off to the side for now. Next you should look for the subject of the main clause, and after that the verb. The subject here is easy to find. It's the nominative plural pronoun we. If the verb doesn't immediately precede or follow the subject, the next place to look for it is at the end of the clause, and that's where it is in this case. Gefrunon, have heard about, the last word before the noun clause. If the verb needs an object, look for that next. There are actually two objects of gefrunon. The first is a complicated structure, but we'll start with the accusative noun thrym, might. This comes right before the verb. An object can also come after the verb, as in modern English, or elsewhere in the sentence, including the beginning. Thrym has at least one modifier, not an adjective, but the genitive theidkuninga of the people kings. A genitive noun can of course have its own modifier, an adjective or another genitive. Let's take the genitive gardena of the Spear Danes as a modifier of theidkuninga, and the prepositional phrase in jardahum, in days of yore, as a modifier of gardena. There are other ways to read these modifiers. What I've done is to take the modifier closest to the noun as modifying it directly, then gardena as modifying theidkuninga, and finally in jardahum as modifying gardena. But other readings are possible. For example, you can take the two genitives as being in variation, both modifying thrym, and the prepositional phrase as modifying gardena. The translation would be just a little different. Thrym and its modifiers make a big noun phrase, the first object of gefrunon. The other object is the noun clause hu tha edelingas ellen fremedon, how those nobles performed valor, a clause so simple we don't need to do a lot to analyze it. Now that we've arranged the elements of the sentence in modern English word order, let's substitute modern English words and see if it looks like a translation. The interjection what is notoriously hard to translate. Let's try yo. Then we have heard about the might of the people kings, of the Spear Danes, in days of yore, how those nobles valor performed. That's not quite modern English. Make it performed valor. Now we have a modern English translation of the first three lines of Beowulf. Not beautiful, but accurate and serviceable enough. Yo, we have heard about the might of the people kings of the Spear Danes in days of yore, how those nobles performed valor.